2 days, one shooter, $7,000 paid, 600 images delivered, and I'm gonna show you exactly how I did it. Let's jump into it. First things first, let's talk about scope. So this was a returning client for me. I'm not just building a relationship off of nothing here. I've worked with them for several different projects. So I'm aware of typically what they're willing to spend for a project. I don't always go into projects thinking hourly. I think what's it going to take for me to deliver. They'll want their photos immediately following the conference so that they can send out press releases, put it on social media, etc. It's very high intensity. I'm usually shooting anywhere from a 6 to 10 hour day. In this case, most of those days were 6 hours, but it's spread over 2 days. So I went in with a mindset of I need to make sure that I'm getting paid for my time while I'm on site as well as in editing. Because of this, I did not approach it like I would typically a cold client. Instead, I went in and the first question I asked was, what's your budget for this project? And they said, for this event, we have about $7,000 in the budget. Now, if I had charged it hourly, there may have been a gap between what I was willing to charge and what they were willing to pay. Or there could be an overage where I was going to charge them astronomically more than what they were willing to pay. Here we have some room to either start negotiating or decide, am I willing to do what you're asking for that price? Now for me, it came in almost identical to what I typically would charge for the amount of time that they were looking for. 20 hours on site, $7,000 invoice. And with that, I made sure to include that they get their deliverables within 48 hours of the end of the event. Now, I know for myself that I move very efficiently. When I'm shooting, I'm culling my images in camera. I'm making my decisions in real time on what I'm going to edit. So when I shoot 3,000 shots on site, I'm not going back to my camera and making sure that I'm editing 3,000 shots as soon as I get back to my camera. Absolutely not. There's no way I'm sitting in front of Lightroom and picking through that many shots. And I feel like when you use an AI editor, they pick whatever they want to pick, so it doesn't always come out looking good. So I've already made those decisions before I get into Lightroom. So usually I'm sitting down only in front of the 600 shots that I actually want to play with, and then I'm going through and making my micro edits. My first goal is to shoot correctly in camera so I don't have to do a bunch of editing on the back end. This is an efficient way to speed up your process and get your product straight to the client. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, $7,000, how do we get to that number? When you're thinking about this, you're not just thinking about a day rate. You want to think all encompassing. So typically for me, I actually have a spreadsheet built out that has my full price list for equipment rentals, day rate, as far as my hourly, if I'm sending an associate, their hourly, and travel time. You want to take full account of everything you're going to do while you're there. So if I'm traveling in, that's a flight. If I'm staying multiple days, that's a hotel. If I'm renting a car to get around versus an Uber, that's a car rental fee. And all of these have real costs. So when you're calculating what to put on the page for your invoice or your quote, you want to think about the real costs that you're going to have and find your way to push that either towards a client or to decide if you're going to assume that cost. So for me, if I have a client who has a fixed budget and says, hey, we only have $3,000 and I know that you want me in Oklahoma City, if I'm not going to book a flight, that means I'm going to drive. How much money is that going to take from what my bottom line is? And I have to decide how much do I want to make within a profit. Also keeping in mind that you have to pay taxes on this item. So are they paying the taxes? Are you assuming the taxes, or are they tax exempt? You have to keep all of those things in mind when you're starting to build an invoice, because these things matter when you're running a business. You want to make sure you're charging something that makes it worth your time, because there are cases where their budget can be so small that once you pay for a flight, hotel, rental car fee, and taxes and associate and whomever, you're not making enough to really even make it make sense for your time. So think of all of those things while you're putting your quotes together and you're shooting out your invoices. It has to be all encompassing. It's not just an overall, here's a $3,500 day rate, here's a $1,000 day rate. You need to decide based on what they give you in their scope of work, their schedule, their timeline, what's going to be worth it for you to make your product and your client happy. Now, here are a couple line items that photographers forget to build. Usually you're thinking, I'm gonna hit them with this large day rate, it's gonna take care of it all. No, you wanna make sure you're covering your travel to and from. Think about the Uber costs. Most times, airports are farther away from downtown hotels, which means your Uber cost is not gonna be a $20 Uber ride, it's gonna be a $100 Uber ride, especially if you're moving with gear and need an SUV. You have to calculate that into your invoice. You wanna make sure you're aware of your usage rights. You want to make sure you're aware of usage rights. If they're going to use this in perpetuity, are they paying that on your day rate? Are you satisfied with what you're getting paid for them to be able to use your ad rights in media across the board everywhere? These are things that should be thought through on your end as you're offering an opportunity to this client. Now, there are some clients who are not thinking about that and they're just going to want something that's in and out. They may have a smaller budget. You could take that. It happens. But for those larger clients, they are thinking about that on the back end. They're going to work that into their contract. So you need to know on your side as well what you're willing to work for and make those decisions ahead of time. Here's what we do. That's why you have standard practices, policies, and procedures. So does my client pay for the taxes? Or do I just assume that cost in the overall bid? Does my client pay for my travel? Or do I just give them a higher number and I cover that for myself? There are times where I have clients who know I'm not in New Orleans, for example. And so they'll come to me and say, hey, we want you here for this date. We'll pay for flight and hotel. Or they may say, hey, we can't cover your hotel, but we can cover your flight. And so then I have to assimilate that into my costs or make a sacrifice. These are some of the costs that are going to come at you, whether directly or indirectly. So as you're lining things out, you need to be aware of what you're willing to pay for. One thing I will say is when I'm creating a quote or sending an invoice, I try not to discount. If I have a number in mind and it doesn't meet their number, or let's say they want to, walk it back, rather than discounting the fee to make it fit, sometimes I'll negotiate on the hours. So let's say if you have a budget of $2,500 for the entire event, it's a 1-day event or maybe a 1.5-day event. I'll say, okay, well, there's going to be downtime here. And looking at your schedule, you may not need this full 4 hours covered, or you've got 8 hours allotted in registration. Let's nix that, do an hour here and an hour there. And so I use some of my efficiencies as a photographer to say, here's how we can streamline this so you meet my rate, but I also don't have to break my back doing all this extra work that's really not going to bear us any fruit. Because at the end of the day, what your client wants, again, is a solution. They want specific images that they can use on the website, in flyers and promotion, on social media, and you know what those images look like. So if you have that in mind, as a photographer, you may not necessarily need a full 8 hours to capture that in a reception hall, because a lot of those images are going to become duplicative. You're going to get a lot of duplicates. So you tell them, hey, we'll catch this, this, and this for these specific moments. Let's earmark it to be this amount of time let's earmark it to be 4 hours as opposed to 8 hours, so that we make sure you're getting what you need officially and you're covering your costs. So that's my way of combating having to reduce that rate. You have to make it make sense for both parties. So when you're looking at pricing your clients, at the end of the day, the biggest thing they care about is most likely not the price. They're thinking about what are they getting on the other end and how is that valuable for them as an organization. And if you can show them a product within your sample of work that is valuable and that's exactly what they're looking for, 9 times out of 10, they're going to go for that product and make it work on that price. They'll wiggle with you to get to where it makes sense for them so they can make sense for their manager. But the biggest thing is once you've sold them on your value and what you're able to create, whether that be through efficient processes, great solutions in how you work and how you return your things, being responsive via emails, creating that relationship up front. Once they have that feel for you and they say, this is what I want to work with, they'll work with you to figure out that bottom line to make sure that the price works. For me, 3 years ago, I may have been charging, $2,000 for this type of event, and I would have gone home happy. Especially if they covered my hotel and I only had to pay a couple hundred for the flight. I'm pocketing maybe, $1,800 or something like that. I would have been like, yes, I made it work. But now that I have a full spreadsheet working for me that's telling me exactly what my costs are, I know better, so I do better. And I'm hoping that this video is going to help you do better. So if you have any questions about pricing, about doing your invoicing when you're working with corporate clients, about how to get to that $7,000 over 2-day client, make sure you leave a comment, comment, and subscribe. And as always, brand responsibly. Again, my name is Jaren Collins. This is Portrait to Corporate, where we do all things well. Until next time, make sure y'all grow with us. And as always, brand responsibly.